All right. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of 2X, the podcast where I share specific actionable insights that will help you scale your business twice as fast. Coming hot off the interview with Tanya, where we're talking about recruitment, I want to take some time to talk a little bit today about the kind of framework around how to view when you should start to hire or delegate versus automation, because that was one of the topics that we brought up in the interview. So we talked a bit about kind of the advent of AI and how a lot of things are being automated nowadays. So kind of how do you approach those two topics? I mean, first, to set some context, this is a little bit different from the episode where we talked a bit about co-founders and equity. The way I like to think of it is co-founders, there's a difference between co-founders and there's a difference between team members. So I've spoken in more length about this in that episode, so feel free to check it out. But to kind of quickly sum it up, the co-founders are the people who would be kind of the foundational team members, the early founders of the organization. They are people that you respect, and they are people that are not only do you respect them, but mostly you respect them to make business-specific decisions in terms of strategy and direction and vision. As you move more into growing and scaling the company, you're thinking about team members now. So you're thinking about these are people that you need to help you realize that vision, not necessarily in terms of shaping it, but more about execution, right? So one framework that I really like to look at is, at the end of the day, a couple of things. One is, as an organization grows, you may or may not have heard this already, but I want to emphasize it here because I think it's super, super important. And I've seen it a lot, especially since I work with a lot of startups, is if you don't set the tone for culture in the beginning, it will be set for you whether you like it or not, because you'll end up hiring people and they will form the foundation of the culture for your organization. And if you hire the wrong people, or people that are, maybe they're great performers, great at executing, but they're not necessarily the best in terms of culture and value fit. And then you'll end up in a situation where you may or may not enjoy coming to work every day, running and working on your business, because it's not a culture that aligns with you yourself. So I do encourage a lot of founders to be a bit more intentional in and around setting the tone for culture and making sure that you are cognizant as you go out and recruit and hire people to fill your team. Because at the end of the day, businesses don't fail. Companies and founders and the people, they leave, they get a job, or they work somewhere else. So do kind of place the importance around that. So let's talk a bit about the idea of delegation versus automation. One framework I really, really love, and you can basically get a much better summary is if you watch the YouTube video by Rory Vaden, that's Rory Vaden. And the title of his TED Talk is called How to Multiply Your Time. And I really love this framework that he shares, and he talks about this thing called a focus funnel. And basically, in a nutshell, the key takeaways here, I'll try to sum it up as best as I can. Number one, we as human beings, we are all basically allocated a similar amount of time in terms of what we have. The issue in and around time is twofold. So one is when we think about us being busy, when we think about the tasks that we have to do, first of all, we need to give ourselves permission to work on the things that we want to work on. Otherwise, if we don't, then we'll end up in situations where things will fill up that space, that gap, and we will end up being busy for the sake of being busy, and we won't have the time to do the things that we want to do, right? So number two that I really took away from his video is in terms of how we perform. If you look at our day-to-day, he talks about, number one, with traditional time management, the first framework is to be more efficient, to do things more quickly, right? And if you look at how technology has advanced, we are able to do a lot of things a lot more quickly. And then the second level then is, now instead of focusing on doing things more quickly, the second dimension is to prioritize. Not only do you do things quickly, but you do the right things quickly, right? Making sure that you focus on the things that matter, that give you the best results. But the missing element in the third dimension that he talks about is the element of significance. So what significance means is there are certain things that maybe they are not necessarily as important as some of the other things on your priority list, but they are a lot more significant, i.e., let's say one example might be if you have to run, let's say, a marketing event. Marketing event is something that is urgent, right? Maybe it's higher in priority because maybe you have something that's coming up this weekend, for example. But there is not a lot of behavioral residue in and around that. So once the event is done, maybe the outcomes are not long-term. Versus if you do something else, let's say, for example, write a piece of content that's thought leadership, something that's going to live on your website, or maybe be put out onto the internet in a video, maybe in a podcast, and it may be a lot more long-term. So it's not to say that one or the other is wrong, but sometimes to prioritize items that are that have high significance value, because the framework that he talks about when he thinks about multiplication of time is if you focus on things that are highly significant, then you will end up in situations where you have freed up time for yourself in the long term. And one example that he gives is, let's say, setting up automatic bill payment. Bill payment, let's say if you do it manually every month, maybe you're spending, let's say, 2 hours a month processing your bill payment, right? That's an exaggeration, but just to give you an idea. So let's say if there's some task that you spend a certain amount of time, let's say every day, every week, or every month, and if you automate the process, the challenge with automation is people often think short term. They're like, oh my goodness, if I have to automate this, maybe it's a tedious process. I need to figure out the right tools, set up the automation, set up the process. And all of that's going to take me, let's say, 4 hours. So if your investment is, let's say, 4 hours to automate something that takes you, let's say, 2 hours to do every month, if you really think about it in the significance term, over 2 months, you will have made your return on investment, right? Your ROI. So even if it's like that, that's a very exaggerated example. But let's say even if it's, let's say, a half an hour task, and let's say it takes 4 hours for you to set up. Over a period of time, you would have recouped that investment of time in terms of automating that process. And now what you've effectively done is every other month after, you are getting that bonus half an hour, which you would have normally spent on that task. And that's how he talks about multiplying your time. So you're giving yourself back that time. And the idea is, the framework he uses called the focus funnel is every task that you get, number one, you should always ask yourself first, do I have to do it? Right? Can you say no to it? And I really love this because it really gives you the permission to say no. And I think the importance here, and kind of reminding myself this when I'm reading Tools of the Titan by Tim Ferriss, one of the chapters from, I don't remember who he quotes, but the quote is, if you have to do something and you're hesitating around doing it, it should either be a hell yes or a fuck no, right? So if you're kind of stuck in between, you're ending up filling yourself, filling your day-to-day with a lot of menial tasks that you don't specifically enjoy doing, which then when you do have certain things or certain projects that you really want to do, you won't have the time to do it because you're kind of booked full with all the small little things. Not to say that the small little things aren't important, but obviously, like if it's not something that you are passionate about, if it's not something that really needs to get done, then can you say no to it? That's the first thing. This applies a lot more to leadership and management, less so for people who are within the organization as employees. So first of all, can you say no? Second level then after is, if you can't say no, obviously there are certain tasks that you will not be able to say no to because it just needs to get done, right? So next level down then is, if I can't say no to it, can I automate it? First and foremost, always think automation before delegation. And a quote from a good friend of mine, John Chan from 2X, is he says, startups, instead of glorifying the idea of being a unicorn, it's much more important to focus on being a cockroach and surviving long enough. A lot of startups tend to scale overly quickly. And once you start to hire, once you delegate, you burn a lot more quickly because now you have cash flow, you have runway to worry about, right? So it's not to say that scaling, growing fast is bad, but necessarily you want to make sure that you're able to survive first and foremost in order to prove some of the basic assumptions. Once you have that proven, once you have some repeatability, then I say, by all means, put the pedal to the metal and go ahead and scale. But first and foremost, if you can automate, try to automate first. It's going to be a lot more cost effective. And to that note, in and around automating, I talked a bit about this in the episode with Tanya, is automation should never be at the behest of losing the human element in your business. It should allow you to be more human, right? So personally, I'm not a big fan of using automation in terms of customer-facing related activities, like chatbots, those kind of things. I don't believe that the technology is quite there yet in terms of giving them a good experience. You can use chatbots in certain ways, though. So, for example, if you're using it to automate the booking process, to schedule an appointment, those kind of things, sure. And then once the appointments, the sales calls, the demos, those are scheduled, then you spend more time with them, right? You automate the things that are data entry, automate workflows and reminders. Those things are good to automate, but it should allow you, free up the time for you to spend more time with your customers, to be more human, to be more personalized with them. So make sure that you automate kind of the back end, the operations, the processes, but obviously also being mindful that you want to make sure that these are optimized before you start to automate it. Because if you don't optimize these processes before you automate, then automation will also create a lot of noise. So one simple example to think about is, if you have a, let's say a sales specific process, and you create a list, and of this list of 100 people, you can close 10% of them. And you say, okay, I'm going to automate this list building. And now I have a list of 1,000 people instead of 100. Then you close 10% of that. That's going to be 100 leads. But there may be another list building process or filter whereby if you build a list of 100 people, because you're selecting for, let's say, a different industry or a different type of client profile, maybe you're able to close instead of 10%, now you're able to close 40%. And if you automate this process now, instead of having a list of 1,000 where you only close 100, you have 1,000 where you close 400, right? So be careful, because automation can create a lot of noise. Think of it as automation is an amplifier. It's a loudspeaker. It allows you to do a lot more of what you're already doing, but you want to make sure that whatever you're doing is the right thing to be doing. Make sense? So that's how I like to think about automation. And then the next level down is if you can't automate it, if it needs some human element, some component of either decision making or maybe that relationship building, then can you delegate it? Because ideally, you will want to not do it yourself. Even if you're a small organization as well, because you are limited in your capacity. And especially if you are the founder, your time is best benefited pursuing very founder-specific activities. Maybe, for example, let's say if you need to do fundraising, or if you need to think about strategy, or if you need to focus on big partnerships. So those kind of things. So it really depends on who you are, what your role is, but can you delegate it? If you can't delegate it, then yes, you should be doing it yourself. So delegation is kind of filter number 3. And if you can't delegate it, then yes, it means you need to do it. In and under the focus funnel that Rory talks about then is, if you can't delegate it, it falls to you, then there's just 2 final decisions for you to do. Do you need to do it now versus can it be done later? If you need to do it now, that means this is focus. You need to concentrate, get it done with, and stop putting it off, right? And if you can do it later, his framework is, it's not procrastination. You're not procrastinating on things that you know should be done now, and you're just putting it off because you don't feel like doing it. But these are things that can be done later because maybe they're not as important now, or maybe by letting things sit for a bit, you may actually be able to get better results because you're able to reflect on things, learn more ideas, add more to it, those kind of things. So he calls that procrastination on purpose. And basically then after is, eventually if you don't do some of these things, if you leave them, you may either finally realize that there are things that don't actually need to be done, so they could have been eliminated to begin with, or they could have been automated, or someone else will pick up the ball if no one else is doing it, and it should have been delegated. Otherwise, then you have to do it now when the time is actually right, and you have to focus. So I do really love that framework, and I do really apply it to my own business as well, and it has helped me immensely. I'm probably handling the workload of at least 3 or 4 people. So do apply that, and then tune in for the next episode. We'll talk a bit more about the recruitment, and not only recruitment, but also leadership and management side of things.